Cool, thanks Tracy. Welcome everyone. Yeah, so ready to dive into the presentation now. Off the bat, please bear with me. I'm still recovering from a bit of a cold, so if I do drop off momentarily or every now and then for a couple of seconds, just excuse me. And then I think, yeah, to start, I've put together this presentation from various different sources, SAP documentation, some blogs, and then of course our learnings. So it might sort of only start to make sense a little bit later on towards the end of the presentation once we start becoming a bit more practical. So just bear with me and keep an open mind, and yeah, I'll take you through it. So a bit of an agenda. We've done the introductions. First of all, I'm going to just provide a bit of an overview of Information Steward. Some of you may already be Information Steward users, and just for ease of reference, I'm going to say IS rather than Information Steward going forward. Some of you might be interested in obtaining Information Steward to help you with your data governance strategy, data ownership, profiling, validations, and so forth. We're then going to go into some of the high-level architecture and data governance principles and exactly how Information Steward or IS fits into that. We're going to look at the core modules of IS, that's the functionality, and also some fundamentals and key concepts, things that we've learned over time that you could use that might provide value in your current solutions if you have it in place, but also very important to know before you start. And those two items will sort of hopefully dive into some practical demonstration, look at at IS itself, and so on. And then data quality management scenarios and examples. This is something that's open for discussion. I cover some examples in the presentation, but this is more a sort of I find sometimes it provides more value to have a specific scenario at hand, and that's where I might ask some of you, what challenges are you facing? How do you expect or see Information Steward as position in your organization, and then we can sort of talk through that, and then obviously some Q&A. All right, so just a little bit of background about our company. It was started in 2011 by two savvy guys here in Cape Town. They have a passion for data, and at their various customers and during their consulting careers, they saw the value and impact of master data. Now, master data is one of the key things we focus on, and master data is central to any organization, to the operations, the processes, systems, etc. So there's an undeniable need to properly manage and govern master data. So the company over the last years have obtained and leveraged lots of experience at different sites. We've built some methodologies. We've proved we can do what we say we can do. We have very skilled consultants and continue to grow in that area as well. And we have a key focus on delivering sustainable value. That word sustainable, as a consultant, you come in, you implement something, and then you go off site, but the customer's left holding the bag. And we really focus on having something that's manageable, understandable, that they can control, our customers can control themselves going forward. We have 4 pillars in the organization. That's management, migration, integration, and governance. I think just as a quick aside, the management, you typically look at your products like the MDG, master data management, operational and functional solutions. With our migration, our key focus currently is S/4HANA migrations and specifically data prep. Now, this is exactly where Information Steward comes in, and this is why I sort of want to qualify our IP, if you want to call it that, to talk about Information Steward, is that we use it to prep data before migrations. If you can clean data into your new system, you reduce your risk considerably. Okay. For
Ben, we
integration,
can't see your screen. Ben, we can't see your screen. It's
oh, I'm
currently
so
black,
sorry.
and I'm not the only one with this problem.
There we go.
Perfect.
Can
There
you
we go.
see?
Better, thank you.
Okay. For integration, we focus on, the operational processes, how the systems communicate. We look at data models, and then obviously how to govern that. And then your governance, we're looking at your data life cycles, um, your governance solutions. This is specifically data governance, not necessarily corporate or other types of governance necessarily, but those do feed into your data governance. Can I just ask you to mute? I think somebody's off mute there. We have some core products, Simple Data Management, which is a governance solution whereby we control point of entry, data entry, etc. And we also have a business rules repository that we've selected over a period of time from various sites, industries, data objects, systems. So that's sort of like a rapid deployment type solution where customers can, when they approach us, we can say, listen, we have these rules set up. All we need to do is tweak them for your specific scenario. We also have support services, and as you can see, we do data services and information steward. And then, we have offices in Cape Town, Joburg, Durban, and the US. We're about 30 plus consultants at the moment, and we have a global footprint, with customers all over the world, essentially. Okay, so that's the spiel. So let's dive into Information Steward. So SAP Information Steward provides BAs, data stewards, IT users in the business a single environment, so it's a central solution to discover, assess, define, monitor, and improve the quality of the enterprise data assets. So we'll dive into more detail in exactly what these words mean. IS also combines functionality such as profiling, data lineage, metadata management, and these provide, and the word there, continuous, is quite interesting, but this provide continuous insight into the integrity of your data. Now, data changes. It's fluid, it might flex in terms of volumes, so the structure is set, or the structures might change depending on how you integrate and implement new systems. It does help also to understand how the quality of your data impacts those business processes. Okay. As we know, master data, business processes, that all affects our day-to-day operations, how we analyze and how we govern, our solutions, essentially. Okay. Scroll down. So the key benefits, and this is the Sapanese, if I can call it that. You maximize visibility into your data quality metrics. Now, that is a very simplified statement, because with all of these, there's a lot of work that needs to go into prepping and building a proper information steward solution. I mean, these metrics, what are these metrics? What defines them? Who owns, how are we going to measure our data quality, etc. Which systems in the landscape are we interested in? What do these dashboards and scorecards need to look like, etc. But IS does simplify that to a large extent. We also enhance our data governance with consistent processes. Now, governance is about controls and standards, effectively. So IS does allow us to apply those, to individual elements or across the organization as well. So it's quite scalable and flexible with all your authorizations built into the solution as well, so that you can better define ownership and have sort of how could I put it, almost quick wins in terms of quick analysis and understanding of how the data influences your processes. Lower IT costs and complexity with one solution. Now, IS, and I'll go into the architecture slightly, is a little bit different to data services or other tools. It does sit central. You have one instance that is shared by all users. So there's visibility across the board. Okay. The functionality around profiling and metadata management, as well as Metapedia, which they don't mention here. We'll go into that again. Basically allow for enterprise-wide use and visibility and transparency of these data, your scores, your analyses essentially. And you can limit that obviously depending on ownership and authorizations. Okay. The key capabilities, I'm not going to go into these in too much detail. This is all available obviously on the SAP Information Steward sites. Information governance, we've sort of touched on that. Monitoring your data quality. Now, monitoring is an ongoing thing. So effectively, your data in your dashboards and your scores comes to life. You can keep a trend. You can see how things change over time. You can then profile specific subsets of the data or everything if you wish. The next step to that is the cleansing. Okay, so data quality, as you cleanse, the quality should improve, and you can see the effect of that. So data-related cost savings, by understanding and controlling our data better, it stands to reason that we're going to improve our operations. So there's operational efficiencies. We're going to reduce the time spent trying to manage this. And of course, if we've got defined rules that we use to measure our data quality, we can use the exact same rules at point of entry, to validate data before we commit it into the system. Okay, so that feeds back into your data governance solution or strategy as well. Data profiling is very much the first step, essentially, in analyzing the data, and it allows you to quickly define where there are hotspots, errors, quick changes, or areas where I can make small changes that have a big impact. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Metadata management is a very important solution when you have a lot of federated systems, essentially, that share common data. You might have customer data, for example, sitting in different systems, in an ERP system, in a CRM system, and it's the same data, but they look different and have different rules applied in these systems. And you may, have then duplicated data. I'm just thinking of a scenario where your keys or your numbering may be different. Your customer numbers in these systems. How do you consolidate that? How do you report on that when you pull all of this together? Metadata management helps with that. So it basically, you define the structures of the data, you can specify the relationship, and then that helps you with the one below it, data lineage, and then obviously data impacts. When I make a change, which systems, what data is impacted by these changes. And then cleansing package builder is another tool within Information Steward. It's all about standardizing data. So you can build standardization rules. It also sort of it parses the data, and then it splits the data out based on your rules into different elements, and you can then go and clean up your data based on that, effectively standardizing the data, and obviously reduce the cost of downstream impact. So this typically happens before you move data from one system to another system. Okay. And I'll talk about the data process and the data flows just now. So the main drivers for getting Information Steward, it has similar functionality technically to other solutions. There are non-SAP tools as well. Data services effectively can do everything Information Steward does, but only up to a point. So, data services being very much an IT tool, Information Steward fills now the gap, between IT and business by providing this interface that's easier to use. It's web-based, it's dynamic, to give you that functionality and more, especially in terms of the reporting side. So where the scorecards, the scoring, and how you bind your rule, to a specific data set or field. how that's done. That's tricky in data services. I can do it, but I'm going to sit with very technical information. I need to go through a manual process of building a report or a dashboard or something additional, where this is now built into Information Steward. Okay. Information Steward then provides transparency into the quality and, very important, the trustworthiness of data. Key business decisions are made on data, on reports. Think about financial data. You've got your financial statements at the end of the period. If your sales figures are incorrect, or your costs are incorrect, or you are allocating certain elements to accounts which they're not supposed to be associated to, or your org structure in your SAP system doesn't accurately reflect your org structure in the business, then you're going to run into problems, because then you're making decisions on effectively inaccurate or untrustworthy data. IS aims to also make the results understandable to business units. It rolls everything up to a high level and shows you your score across whatever it might be, a department, a data object, specific
label. I'm still thinking, I'm trying to figure.
Sorry, I think somebody's not on
which
mute. Okay, so it rolls this up to a higher level, which is customizable, but then you can drill down into the detail. You can go right down to a field level and see exactly where the issues are on this field. So, from your business analyst to your data steward to, a manager can use these scorecards. Okay. IS also helps highlight the need and helps to establish your data ownership. Now, data governance is very much built around this, about who controls this as well. So typically an organization might establish a data governance council, your CIO and maybe your IT directors and business managers are part of this team or this board, and they drive this governance strategy via the data architects, let's say, who then feed to the managers and or the line managers and the business analysts or data analysts, essentially, who are at the ground level, who then implement this technically in the systems and in the organization. Okay. It also expands the scope of your data management activities to these data stewards and business users. All of a sudden, I understand my data better. I know where the issues are. So there's so much more that I can do now to control this within my organization. Okay. So touching on architecture and data governance, we need to see where this fits, where Information Steward fits. It's how and where Information Steward is used that's important here, and that's very much dependent on what I call the usage scenario, let's say. So these scenarios are customer specific. I mean, it changes. You have different organizations operating in different industries. Rules for healthcare is not the same as rules for oil and gas. The governance is also different in a financial institution as opposed to a manufacturing institution, regulations, etc. So it very much depends where you use it. And then, of course, it depends on how the data flows. What is it that you are doing? Are you migrating? Because then it's typically a once-off data preparation exercise that you use Information Steward for. You can look at your daily operations. So you can apply data services directly onto an enterprise system that you're using every day in your organization to monitor and keep that data clean, essentially. So it's very much, it depends where you use Information Steward. And I'll go into exactly how it feeds into the governance side of things. But just to give you some examples of operational, of how it's applied in an operational system, you can see that we have, let's say, an ERP system here. We then pull the data into Information Steward, analyze and measure our quality, or profile the data, build the rules, analyze and measure the quality. The outcome of that is that we're going to get some exceptions and errors. Okay. Now these errors, if we don't cleanse them, they're just going to sit there, and the data is going to stay like that in that state in our source system, operational system. But by cleansing the data in the source system, we are effectively closing the loop And you can see that this is like a cycle. Okay, and this is iterative and continuous. Now I'll come back to that word continuous that we mentioned earlier. You can see that this is now can become part of KPIs, your data measurement, and then that feeds into the ownership of data. You as a procurement manager, that's the data functional area you're looking after. So your procurement data needs to hit a certain target in terms of data quality score, and there might be a deadlines or time periods associated with that. So, all of a sudden there's an HR element coming into this as well, and that's why we say that, it just broadens the whole scope, of your governance solution and strategy, essentially. Okay, so then by closing the loop, that's where we get the value. When we validate, our exceptions decrease, our data quality improves. It's the iterative cycle, and it's like this heartbeat, that just keeps pumping and pumping and improving. But now what happens if I implement a new system, or I integrate a new system here, or I want to combine my ERP and my CRM data based on my previous example? All of a sudden now I might be introducing some data of lower quality, and this would drag everything down. So it's very important, to understand that everything is constantly in motion. And as you introduce new data sets or new systems, or change your rules, let's say, the results will change, and that would impact the effort required to go and manage those changes. The second example is just an example of typically an integration phase. You have a source system where you need to extract and transform that data, load it into a target. Let's say you're moving to data from a source system into a data warehouse or an operational data store. Information Steward you can typically apply at the point of extraction, so to understand what the source system looks like, and you can apply it post transformation, so you can validate before you load it into your target system, and you can do both as well. That would actually be great, because you'll have a baseline or a starting point, and then you'll have an end state to compare that to, and you can do reconciliation external to this process, which is a good principle to implement. But then during your transformation stage, let's say we're using data services, which is our ETL tool of choice when running Information Steward, we can pull these transformation rules and criteria into Information Steward to help and assist in validating that the data that we've transformed conforms to the rules set. Okay, and this exact scenario can be used for migration. So we would extract from our source system, we'd transform, maybe enrich the data. We would consolidate various systems, and then we would load it into our target, which would be, for example, your S4HANA or similar. Okay. When looking at Information Steward at a technical level, I always say Information Steward can't exist without data services. Data services can't exist without your BI platform. Now, these are just the three applications that make up the stack, essentially, to run Information Steward. So if you're not too familiar with it, don't be put off by this. It's the platform basically provides the backbone. It's the central management system. Here we can do key administration tasks like user management, grouping users, assigning authorizations. It provides back-end services, all the operating system services and the technical services that are required for Information Steward to run. Also, because it's central, it provides this integration and visibility of objects within all these modular applications. So data services, for example, Information Steward, maybe use Web Intelligence for reporting or Crystal reports. You have universes, you can build your data cubes for reporting as well on the business object stack. This all is visible via the central platform. Okay, so it's quite powerful in that regard. Everything is native, effectively seamless. Okay, on top of that, we have data services, which is an ETL tool. Okay, data services is very powerful when used for data extraction, data transformation, data loading. The integration is probably arguably some of the best that is available in one tool without having to apply all sorts of add-ons and packages and purchase additional licenses, etc. It's got native integration to SAP applications and systems, all the major database management systems. It can do big data integration, files, cached sources, in-memory systems. So it's very powerful in that regard. But data services is effectively a workhorse. It's the engine room, that's the guy that actually goes and does the work and executes the work. Now that's quite different to Information Steward, which provides this metadata and visibility layer on top of that. Information Steward, the business can define rules and assign or identify a data set they wish to apply the rules to, and that becomes a task which is then submitted to the data services engine, and data services executes those calculations and does the processing. Okay, because it's built on the data services or based on the data services application, it's very scalable. It does all the load balancing and the performance management via data services. So it's quite powerful in that regard. So the licensing, if I can just touch on that quickly, I'm not going to go into too much detail because the licensing really does differ, based on scenarios and from customer to customer. Effectively, data services and Information Steward are typically core-based, so you pay per CPU or core that you wish to use. You can license Information Steward separately, so you don't have to have data services, but you will essentially install data services, in order to be able to run Information Steward. But then you would be limited in terms of, prepping the data and then obviously executing the ETL processes that might come before and after the Information Steward step, in your data flow. Some data services licenses do include certain modules of Information Steward for free, and that would just depend on how many cores you go for and what type of license you procure. Okay, I mentioned here that Information Steward cannot be operated standalone. It's dependent on data services in the platform, as I said, but having said that, data services does provide that flexible technical layer, essentially, execution layer. So you can scale in that regard. Okay. Deploying Information Steward on a distributed environment. This is for the technical people. You can run Information Steward on its own server. There's always contention for resources. These calculations that Information Steward essentially does are very complex and time consuming. So you don't want to bring down your system if you're running a data services job and an Information Steward task at the same time. Okay, in terms of configuration, Information Steward has what we call a repository. That's a database that houses all your config. All your rules that you create, all the metadata that you've imported, about the data structures, how you've designed your scorecard, that's all config. Information Steward, in essence, doesn't hold data. I'm not extracting data into Information Steward as such. I plug Information Steward on top of my data set. So the data still sits in that source database or the source system. And Information Steward pulls it into the application, analyzes it, and then provides us the summarized result. It will store, if you configure it, for example, exceptions, so your failures, your failed data set, and it'll store sample sets of data, just for the ease of use of application, so you can drill down, and it helps you also. It's part of the iterative design process. Change a rule run the task, go and check what failed. Oh, I missed something. Update the rule again. But it doesn't actually hold data as such, and it should never be used as a as a source system for downstream data processing. Okay. Data services, on the other hand, provides many repositories, and typically a repository is tied to a user. So that's like your workbench that you need in order to design and develop your various ETL jobs or your data quality jobs, for example. So when it comes to deploying it in the landscape, we have different tiers in our enterprise system. So let's say we've got a development, test, pre-production, and production. That's 4-tier. Data services would follow that exact landscape tiering. So you would have an instance of data services in each of those tiers. Information Steward is sometimes a bit different, just because it's not the same type of application. It's more a business tool, and in saying that, the business only focuses on your production data. That's the system they actively use. That's where the user accounts are, and then it stands to reason that Information Steward then would follow that same principle or path. And that does not mean that you don't have an instance of Information Steward, let's say in pre-production, which is very much your production type data or close to production, because that's where you're going to get real value in your testing, when you're developing a rule, etc. When you transport work from, let's say, pre-production to production, you will lose certain information in Information Steward. It's very much dependent on that specific instance of the data, that data set. So I can't take my history and my trend, my scores in my pre-production system are not applicable in my production system. It's a completely different data set, effectively. So none of that goes across, so you can transport your core component like your rule, let's say, which is a function. But then I need to go and tie it to my data set, and then I can run my, my validations of that. Okay. I hope that makes sense. So it's actually a very easy, the IS landscape is actually very easy. It's usually just probably about 2 tiers, and business users can actually make changes and, in production itself. And that is quite important, in terms of your trend management and so forth. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail later. Okay. So I'm just going to touch quickly on data governance. Some of us might know what data governance is, some of us don't know. I, for one, learning something new every day about data governance. I'm not a governance expert per se, but I found this explanation of what data governance is, which I thought was quite apt. It was, consolidation of different sources, and it's not specifically SAP related. Data governance is a it's a principle that can be applied to any organization that has data. It's effectively a management strategy to meet the data quality needs. Okay, and we have people who consume the data, and the data that they consume needs to fulfill those specific needs and drive the business. So it's extremely important to control that. The verification that the data meets those requirements, compliance, regulations, that's all the normal governance stuff that feeds down into your data governance, into your management and control of your data. Okay, you're reducing your risk. I mean, if you don't conform to, let's say, POPI or GDRP or something like that, you can stand to be fined as an organization. So by implementing these controls here, you are reducing the risk and effectively, maybe saving a bit of money if you were at risk, of that. So data governance is this marriage of data quality, data management, and these risk management principles. Okay. So if we look at IS specifically, data quality, we are measuring that. Data management, it allows us to go and rectify issues and apply processes and principles in our systems at a technical level and at a business level, to manage the data. And effectively, this combines into this whole risk management principle. We want to reduce the risk in our organization. That's where the corporate governance comes in. So you can see that Information Steward is ticking these boxes in the data governance space. Okay. Basically, data governance can differ immensely across organizations. We all know that, but it's clear that data governance is an enterprise-wide strategy. Okay, you're not going to get away from that. I can't govern, one part of my business and another part not, because at some point all of this meshes, and you may then run into, other issues, or you're only as effectively as strong as your weakest link. Let's put it that way. So a data governance strategy needs to be applied across the entire organization. It may differ from, let's say, department to department or system to system, but effectively there are principles that are the same. Okay, there are some goals, and this is quite important to keep in mind when looking at Information Steward as well as a solution. We want to understand how the data relates and drives our business. We want to apply, governance for regulatory security requirements, etc. We want to identify these errors and risks, and we want to be able to fix them. Okay. We also want to stop bad data, if I can call it that, from coming into the system and then permeating. Okay, because it sort of compounds the issue and it snowballs, and it might become a much larger issue in the end. You might have some processes. Let's say you're an organization that has a material master, or a retailer, let's say, with an article, and you have a product on the shelf that's basically at the incorrect unit of measure. So you've got the wrong pack size, let's say. Let's say it's physically a 6-pack, but the system says it's an 8-pack. So now I'm effectively selling the customer less products than what my system is saying. And I need to fix that. But I can't just go and fix the unit of measure. I need to flush all my open orders out of the system. I need to journal my stock in the warehouse. And then I can do the conversion and write back, the stock at the new unit of measure. That effectively is either going to under or overstate my asset, if you will. So this becomes very important to remember that by catching these issues early on and applying your governance, even at point of entry, you can stop having to deal with this issue, which can take days, even weeks, to rectify in some instances. Okay, and then ultimately we want to maintain the data quality at an acceptable level. That's that continuous heartbeat, the cycle. We want to close that cycle, get the data clean, and keep it clean. Okay, now that acceptable level can also differ. You can imagine, that's open for debate, and it would depend on the requirements at hand. If you have a specific data object where there's no tolerance, then you would need to maintain 100% data quality. Now that's not always possible. It's the utopia, for any organization to reach 100% data quality over the entire business. The argument is that that's impossible because the data is the organization is continuously changing. From year to year, strategy changes. There's restructuring. New processes come in. Old processes are removed. And that inherently then changes the data requirement and the quality requirement continuously. That is a bit of a utopia, but in some instances, you can come very close to that. Okay, I've spoken a bit about how Information Steward fits into this data governance strategy. Okay, it provides the functionality, and we'll touch on that now. To implement some solutions and tools to manage governance. Those modules can be used independently, they can be used in combination, and then the decision is basically what order do I apply this. Do I first want to get a common understanding of what these things mean in my organization? So do I first implement the Metapedia? which is the business glossary, or do I first profile my data, and then build some rules, and then see where the issues are, and then try and get to a business glossary later. Okay, but Information Steward effectively provides the tools the organization needs to meet those goals. Okay, so Information Steward is basically contained in these modules. We have the Data Insight module. Now that's probably, that is the most widely used module, and it's the one that provides you all your profiling and validation functionality. You build your scorecards, your rules, and everything inside Data Insight. Metadata management, I mentioned a little bit earlier. You are basically capturing the structures and the nature of your data across systems, and then you can build the relationships within that and do your data lineage and data impact assessments, etc. The Cleansing Package Builder is a standardization tool. You define some rules, and it basically generates a little program that you can go and run on your data in order to standardize it. There's match review functionality, which it comes down to deduplication. Okay, and there are decisions that need to be made, because a match might not always be 100%, but when you analyze the data, but we know that physically, it is a duplicate. It's a duplicate product or a duplicate customer or a duplicate vendor in our system, which we need to fix. Okay. Data Quality Advisor is a little tool available in the newer versions of Information Steward. It sort of analyzes and provides quick suggestions as to which rules can be implemented off the bat. Now, these are very much superficial rules in nature. It doesn't have a lot of business logic behind it. That's where the custom rule development comes in. But it does help, if you're looking at fields that, let's say, your key fields or required fields, or you have specific range of values that are the only values that are allowed within a certain field. Those are the types of rules that the Data Quality Advisor can help you generate very quickly. Okay, so going into detail for Data Insight. Data Insight, basically you can pull in a range of sources. I've mentioned the integration capability of data services, and the exact same is available in Information Steward, or pretty much the same. You then have two sort of areas or focus areas within Data Insight. The one is the profiling. This is sort of your statistical and mathematical analysis of the data set. It shows distribution, it shows stats and figures, what the data looks like, it's aggregated. It helps you better understand your data. In most instances, when we run our first profile at a customer, it's like, wow, okay, we can see that there's a problem, that field's not supposed to look like that. Why are these values in there, and we need to fix that. So profiling provides a lot of value off the bat to better understand your data. Okay. The next step is validation. Now, for validation to be able to happen, we need to build a rule, and the outcome of my rule is like true or false. So, and that's the validation result. But the rule, I need to specify what is it that I'm wanting to measure. So I validate a specific field with that rule. Okay, I can't do a full table, but I can bind a rule. I can assign a rule to multiple fields. Okay, and vice versa. So a rule is basically a function. Anybody who's got a bit of a programming background, or if you've used Excel for that matter, if you do your if then else, that's a function. But you open the bracket, you have some parameters, and you close the bracket. Okay, and it works in exactly the same way. Okay. So a rule can then be either kept private within a specific project, let's say, within IS, or it can be shared across all projects in the organization. So that's effectively where you have a much more high-level governance that you wish to apply, or validation. A rule that's maybe the same across systems, or for a data object. I mean, if you have reports per manufacturing plant, let's say, and you have 20 plants in your organization, you're effectively going to have 20, directories, 20 projects, one for each plant. But I only want to configure a rule once and share it across all 20. I don't want to go and maintain 20 rules every time. But because every plant works in pretty much the same way, then you can achieve that, and it's very easy to manage and automate. So you have that reusability. Okay. A rule, the nice thing about the rule is if you've got data services and using that as your ETL and transformation or integration tool, you basically build the rule in Information Steward and you can import it into data services. If you change the rule in Information Steward, all I do is I just refresh it in data services. And I have that rule available as a function that I can apply to data very quickly. And then data services has some additional sort of dashboards for data validation that you can use as well to basically provide some more information or some more technical detail into my results. Okay, the other large component of data insight is the scorecard. And I'll show you what that looks like, but there are a couple of key things here. The scorecard effectively, as I said, tracks the trend and then shows you the quality. But how and where, I mean, I can't just have a blanket figure for data quality that doesn't provide any value. We can set up a key data domains. Now, what we call, or what we mean by that, it's basically a area of control, a functional area, a data object. So let's say for the material data object, there are various different areas within that object. So you have your procurement, your pricing, you have your basic data, you have your resource planning, warehousing. So all of those you can set up as data domains, and you can track quality within each of those separate areas, if you will. And that will provide a lot more value than just having a blanket figure. What I'm measuring is also very important. So within these domains, I can then measure things like how accurate is my data? Is my data complete? Does my data conform? That's the standardization part. Is it timely? What's the uniqueness? Is my data redundant? And these are the different types of quality dimensions that you can test or validate within Information Steward. Okay. The next module is metadata management. I have spoken about this. I won't go into too much detail here. But I just want to mention that there are additional there's additional licensing available where you can integrate a whole range of other third-party systems that are not included in the standard package. Okay, so you can expand this, and these do not have to be systems that you are using with data services and Information Steward necessarily for your profiling and validation. This can be your entire organization. All the systems, are basically mapped in Metadata Manager. Okay. The other module is the Metapedia. As I've said, this is a business glossary. We can define these terms, categorize them. These terms can be approved by stewards or managers, and then published to business users. So it provides clarity on meanings. You can have a term that means different things in different divisions of the organization. So this effectively would allow the business to go and define what does it mean in each of these areas, and then we can sort of link the terms to objects and within Information Steward even. So when I have a rule that's on a specific field, I can go and have that visible. So when I go and change my rule, I can actually see what it does mean. So that provides a lot of value to the business user in terms of the understanding. A business glossary then gets everybody effectively to speak a common language. Okay. We can also expose those terms via a web service call. So other systems, maybe you have a SharePoint or something, you can pull those terms and definitions effectively out of IIS and expose them somewhere else. Okay, cleansing package builder I've covered. It's your standardization rule set, or this little program that you build. It's also importable into data services, so I can run it. Data services is the workhorse, as I said. Can run this rule set. We have different types, like your person firm type, which is looking at address, names, things like that, and then custom types. This is open, and it's cleansing packages are very good with manual input and descriptor fields. So your custom types would relate to your material naming or conventions, telephone numbers, let's say, anything that's entered manually into the system. You can then go and standardize and apply those rules going forward. I know some retailers, they'll have a description for a material, and that description would look different. On your till slip, you can't have a long description because it's not wide enough to print it. So then you can have these elements of the name defined, and you can go and group them and exclude certain ones from that convention based on a specific scenario. The shelf label also looks different, and obviously in the core system, the ERP system, let's say, you've got the full name. And it's quite valuable in that regard. One example I can think of is many of our customers, when they don't have a use for a product or a customer or event anymore, you put like deleted in the description. I'm sure most people have seen that. There's no standardization that can be applied there. If I go and pull everything with the deleted in the description, it doesn't mean anything if I don't have the status elsewhere on the object set to either inactive or flagged for deletion or flagged for archiving, etc. Okay. Match review. As I said, the core focus is deduplication. We define the conditions for matching, and then the match result returns the probability of a match. So let's say I've got 3 customer entries that look very much the same. So the match review shows me those 3 that are very similar, and the business, I can expose those results to the business. They can effectively select which is the master, and which are the subordinate records, and then you can do a cleansing exercise where you roll those 3 accounts into one effectively. And I mean, there's obviously a business process and a change process that needs to be applied to that, but this effectively gives the business owners the ability to go and define the consolidation and to basically manage the deduplication of their data, and that then improves the quality. You can imagine the risk of having duplicate vendors, with different bank accounts. That opens the door for fraud effectively. So deduplication is an extremely important part of data quality management.